What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Titus Gaming News, where a man whose neck is too fat for his tie sarcastically relays to you all the hottest news and controversy of the last week or so. As some of you may notice, I am not currently sitting at my desk. I was having some technical difficulties with my webcam, so instead I've commissioned an artist to create an accurate portrayal of myself, which I think is quite good. Also here at Gaming News, we would like to offer the first 10 people who subscribe to the channel after this video drops a nice firm handshake and an uncomfortable amount of eye contact. So don't miss out, subscribe today. In our first story, Nintendo issues an apology for the confusion over VRR in the Switch 2. According to Nintendo, there was a bit of a mix-up on their product website, which stated that the system would have VRR, or variable refresh rate, for the Switch 2, which isn't entirely the case. For those of you who don't know what VRR, or variable refresh rate, is, it is essentially a technology that allows the system to sync with the display and compensate for any fluctuations, so you can avoid things such as stutter and screen tearing. Well, now you know what VRR even means. It turns out that the Switch 2 will have this, but only while the system is undocked. Now, whether this will vastly impact its performance while docked, it was pretty funny that Nintendo originally tried to shadow edit this and then issued a statement once the eagle-eyed internet dwellers called them on this fact. It does seem a bit weird to me simply because Nintendo has committed far more egregious acts than a bit of a typo, but it has led some to speculate that perhaps they had hoped to mislead consumers with false advertising. Now, I'm not entirely sure of this fact, as Nintendo seems quite knowledgeable about product law, so this would be a pretty blatant misfire. In our next story, Nintendo of America President Doug Spencer Bowser, which, as a quick aside, I don't believe this man's actual last name is Bowser. Alright, until I see a birth certificate or something, because, in my opinion, irony cannot be that perfect. I mean, come on, guy's last name is Bowser. He works in Nintendo. I mean, did they like make this guy in a lab or something? Anywho, in a May 15th interview with IGN, good old Bowser used a lot of words to basically say, if you want to buy a Switch 2, buy it now because the price only gonna go up from here. Now, of course, Bowser didn't actually say this, but it would have been a lot more honest in my opinion. During this interview, Bowser would say, well, we made a commitment by announcing the pricing of both the Switch 2 at $450 and then bundled Switch 2 with the Mario Kart World at $500, and we really thought it was important that we establish that price point, even after further tariffs were announced, to give consumers that comfort that they would be able to purchase at that price point. Obviously, it is still a very fluid situation, and it's difficult to determine what may be happening in the upcoming months or weeks. But our commitment is to find ways within existing market conditions or changing market conditions to make our products, including Nintendo Switch 2 hardware, as obtainable as we possibly can. Now, of course, we all knew that with the tariffs being imposed by President Trump, there would be a price increase, and reading Bowser tap dancing around the subject, I am 99.99% certain that sometime after launch, the $450 Switch 2 will become more expensive, though how much so at this time remains to be seen. This next story sees Warner Bros. Announcing, perhaps more loudly and proudly than they should, that their game division saw a 48% loss in profits, because of course it did. Their only major release title for 2024 was Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, a bare-bones derivative 4-player online mission-based shooter that was less of a game and more of a way for the studio to cash in on that sweet, sweet DC money, baby. It came flying out of the door and promptly tripped over its own goddamn feet, face planting spectacularly. With an average player count at the time of this recording of 88 people, the game was a massive flop and Warner Bros. Is obviously feeling it. Couple that with the fact that in 2024, Warner Bros. Their only other releases were classic titles such as Harry Potter Quidditch Champions, Lego Harry Potter Years 1 through 4, and then 5 through 7. That's right. They basically split one game into two and charged you twice. And Multiverse, a Smash Brothers clone that was taken off life support at the beginning of this year after barely barely releasing out of its beta or alpha for like a month. Anyway, I'm surprised that Warner Brothers even saw a 52% profit for their gaming division, and imagine that money came from either people who bought it to see if it was indeed as bad as they said it was, or people like poor old Angry Joe who hasn't seen Superman in a decent game since Injustice 2. Hopefully Warner Brothers will realize that even though you hold the rights to make games on popular IPs, that still means you need to make a decent game. Or make a new Lord of the Rings game and maybe use that Nemesis patent you have. Hell, what do I know? In our runner-up for Story of the Week, we see Epic Games petitioning the California court systems as to what they see as Apple defying the spirit of their previous court ruling. As we know, Epic Games has won their court case against Apple, but as CEO Tim Sweeney stated, Apple has left us in limbo. This statement comes as Apple has neither approved or denied Epic Games' application to reinstate Fortnite on the Apple Store. Now, about a week later, Apple would later deny their application. While most of us understand that this is simply a petty play by Apple to stick it to Epic Games one last time, even at the time of the ruling, Judge Roger had stated she wasn't inclined to force Apple to allow Fortnite back onto the iOS store. She would then state further at a later date, Apple is fully capable of resolving this issue without further briefing or a hearing. Now, Apple wasn't silent about this. Even though the ruling has been passed, Apple has stated that it will itself seek an appeal. So, as it stands right now, Apple does have to use the third party, or has to allow developers to place third-party payment options to which they can't see commission onto their store. However, they have now also moved to file an appeal, so this court case is still ongoing. Unfortunately, for all the users who were hoping to rush for chicken dinners, at this moment, you will seemingly have to wait as this story and legal battle further unfolds. In this next story, we keep talking about Epic Games CEO Tim Sweeney because he's been a bit of a busy boy. On May 13th, it was noted that Timmy was seen rubbing elbows at lunch with some pretty notable people, including Elon Musk, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, and President Donald Trump, along with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. Now, with a star-studded cast such as this, people quickly began speculating what this could mean, including one hilarious Redditor with the comment that I personally enjoyed that said, perhaps old Timmy is petitioning Trump to impose tariffs on Steam. For those of you who don't know, Steam is the largest retailer of PC games that's out there, and they're also Epic's biggest competitor. While my money would probably be not on that, and would probably be more towards the funding side of things, as Saudi Arabia has shown quite the interest in gaming in the past couple of years, injecting massive amounts of money into the industry, so long as, you know, video games don't have none of that their gay stuff that's illegal in Saudi Arabia. Honestly, only time will really be able to tell us what was actually spoken about behind closed doors. There is obviously some tension between our government and the Middle East and a lot of those countries over there, so it could be a little more complex than just trying to get Steam from cornering most of the PC gaming market. All right, guys, in this story, let's talk about a W for gamers, where game director Dmitry Grigorenki, and I hope I didn't butcher that name too badly, had announced that players can have the dev kit and then just gave it to them. As they outlined, this dev kit will allow players to edit Space Marine 2's AI behavior trees, level scenario editor, UI, HUD elements, weapon combos, and probably much more. Now, I believe this is an excellent idea, as having a robust modding community can keep a game alive a lot longer than when the game initially released. For those of you who remember Skyrim, that game kept selling copies long after its release, and while the game was an excellent entry to Bethesda's catalog, we all know that it was due to all the free content, hundreds of hours of free content, mind you, that players could access. Look, if there's one thing that I know about my people, it's that even the most attentive devs are no match for thousands of nerds given a chance to alter a game to their liking. So, if you bought Space Marine 2 when it first launched, you haven't played it in a while, you can probably look forward to getting a lot of new free content as time moves forward. Finally, in our top story of the week, Bungie once again gets caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Now, if I had a nickel for every time Bungie has been accused of copyright infringement, well, in this economy, I'd have enough nickels to put a down payment on a pack of gum. However, I will say it is odd that both of these claims have come so close together. Bungie, in a Play MA watched by 10 whole people where they talked about a lot of nothing and showed even less, in preparation for their upcoming game Marathon, an extraction shooter that looks like some poor college student's alpha project, was vandalized with neon paint that no one asked for. During that stream, people would begin to notice that some of the art assets looked familiar, and eventually it would come to light that these assets were lifted one-to-one from an artist known as Antireal or Antireal, Antire Al. I'm going to say Antire Al, but if I am getting this incorrect, I apologize. Antire Al would take to Blue Sky to say the following: I don't have the resources nor the energy to spare to pursue this legally, but I have lost count of the number of times a major company has deemed it easier to pay a designer to imitate or steal my work rather than write me an email. Now, while I'm sure that the number of times that this has happened would allow them to join me in a tasty bubblegum down payment, it is true that major companies should be held to a high standard when it comes to not stealing people's stuff. Art director Joe Cross would make this perfectly composed PR style announcement in light of this controversy, saying the following: it came to our attention that an artist who worked on Marathon in the early stages of pre-production took a number of graphic elements from a graphic designer without permission or acknowledgement, and then placed them on a decal sheet that was then checked in 2022. Of course, you say this because it's much easier to blame someone who may no longer be at the company than anything else. Of course, what do interns exist for if not to be thrown under the bus and then potentially backed over if need be? He would further state, the decal sheet included icons and text elements. These elements ended up in our alpha build. There's absolutely no excuse for this oversight, and we are working on and 100% committed to our review process to ensure instances like this don't happen again on Marathon or at Bungie. He would finish by saying that Bungie has reached out to the artist they robbed, but no further information was provided. Now, I don't know if that's actually true, and I haven't seen anything to shed light on whether or not they did reach out and if maybe some form of agreement or compensation was talked about. However, the lack of any forthcoming evidence tells me that that is probably not what happened. When major companies go and do this, it is not good. I feel like that's kind of the default phrase, right? And it's one of those things where it's much worse when a large company like Bungie, who can pay through the nose for artists, would rather lift things from a Google search than actually taking the time and doing their due diligence to figure out whether or not this art should be attributed or bought. Of course, I throw a lot of flack at artists, but obviously, to some extent, those are my people too. right? As this is, you know, doing YouTube is a bit of an artistic expression to entertain. So what I will say is, while once is a mistake and twice is a coincidence, by the third time, this is now a pattern of behavior that somebody with a lot more legal authority than myself should probably begin to try to look into. So anyway, guys, that's been all from the broadcast. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that fancy YouTube stuff, because a random person on Reddit told me that that would make me a better YouTuber. Also, we are currently working on putting up a community Discord, and we have altered our stream a bit. We are now streaming Friday and Saturday, as I do require Sundays mostly to put these videos together for you guys. And we will be streaming Friday and Saturday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to probably about 1 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you have the time and you're interested, come check us out there. We also are going to continue our critique series, so you can expect that every Friday. I appreciate everybody coming out and joining me for this broadcast. I've been Titus. That's all from me. And until next time, I'll see you.